Welcome to Massey College. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers and I'm the principal of Massey College. It's my great privilege to have you here today to discuss a very interesting subject. We're going to celebrate Asian Heritage Month this month of May, and we're delighted to start today with this first talk on being Asian geek in medicine. So we're looking forward to hearing about that. I want to acknowledge Massey College is built on indigenous lands, the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and it is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And we want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to be all here together. So to introduce our speaker, I'm going to invite a very special person to Massey College. She is a senior fellow at Massey College, and she is Chancellor Emerita from University of Toronto. She was a senator, the first Asian-born senator in the Senate of Canada, and where she focused on gender issues, and she is responsible for the fact that May is recognized as Asian Heritage Month in Canada. So I want to welcome the Honorable Vivian Poy.
Thank you, Natalie. I want to thank you for doing this, and I learned that last year was the first time Asian Heritage Month was celebrated here. And I was just told by someone very recently, in fact, yesterday, when I said I was going to come and what is happening here, and I was told that the idea had been put forward to the past masters, or no longer masters, they're principals now, of Massey College, and there was absolutely no reaction. So what we need is a dynamic woman like Natalie to be doing this. And it's my honor to recognize Dr. Chi-Ming Chow and to say a few words about him before he speaks. And I can't do this without him sending me something yesterday. Dr. Chow is a full professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto and a staff cardiologist at St. Michael's Hospital. He also serves as the director of the Echo Lab, is it Echo? Is that correct? At St. Michael's. He is the past president of the Canadian Society of Echo and current president of the Chinese Canadian Medical Society. Dr. Chow has received multiple local and national teaching awards, such as the Canadian Society of Echo Achievement Award, the Canadian Cardiovascular Society Distinguished Teacher Award, and the Rudy Award for Innovation in Medical Education from the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada. Dr. Chow was also the recipient of the Chinese Canadian Legend Award for his outstanding service to the community. Dr. Chow is fluent in Cantonese and Mandarin and takes care of many Chinese-speaking patients in the GTA. Well, Dr. Chow, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a great honor to be back to Massey College. In fact, a few years ago, I was actually just in the back room actually doing my professor day. When you get fully promoted to become a full professor in the Department of Medicine, you get a day where you can actually bring your family, friends, and colleagues and actually show my mother-in-law this is actually real and very important. And also, I just want to mention when Dr. Poy emailed me last night about my CV and short bio. You have to be like 150 words. I put it through ChatGPT and actually make it look better. So a little bit about technology, and really truly been honored to be speaking at this particular occasion, a very prestigious organization in college. And I want to share with you in the next 15 minutes or so about my path as a first-generation immigrant to Canada, and a rather unusual path of being a doctor. You heard about doctor, there's a certain stereotype. You heard about like engineers or computer science people, geek, in a certain stereotype, and how I put all these stereotypes together and become one, and hopefully help people along the way. So this is a portrait of a very atypical cardiologist. I spent much of my career talking about, being a nerd versus a geek. I won't go into details, not a lecture, and you won't have to take notes about it, but really a geek is a more sort of advanced, developed version of a nerd. So I much more prefer to be a geek than a nerd, but I started out being a nerd when I was a lot younger. So just a little bit about the Asian heritage piece. I'm originally from Hong Kong. This is actually one of the more well-known Catholic schools. I grew up with Jesuit fathers, and in many ways it has influenced me to be helping other people, and less so, thinking too much about the wealth on earth, so as to say. So that was actually the principle that I learned when I was growing up. In Cantonese, it will be 非益於人,乃益於人. So that 8 words that we live by in the pursuit of what I just said. So this is actually the campus. It still look about the same at this point when I went back home. And after finishing my O-levels, or equivalent of which, I had the privilege of actually getting a scholarship and to pursue a international baccalaureate, which was actually 40 years ago to the date. And it's very, when you think about it, nobody knew about what international baccalaureate was. In fact, when I applied to UofT, I did. And I had to explain what IB was, and similar to the private school in US and similar to Hong Kong Medical School. So I have to explain all that to them. But be that as it may, the reason why I brought this up is because it really changed the way I look at the world. Part of it is because of the IB itself, because when I was growing up in Hong Kong, all you focus, if you are going to be a science student, you're science. You only need 4 subjects to become a doctor. So math, physics, chemistry, biology. All you have to do is do well in them, and you'll be able to speak English also. That's very important. But then they never talk about talking to other people. So it's all about science. And then, with the IB, I was able to actually get back into literature, history, economics, and sort of now it is really important. As being a physician, you have to be able to talk to people. Otherwise, the ChatGPT is going to take over because it's actually apparently more empathetic than actually doctors. It's very concerning. I wonder which doctors they actually use to compare against. Okay, so I think what I want to share with you is some of my path, and it's really the story of how you actually keep running into things and without really planning your life properly, and how you could actually put it all together and still help people. So many young people here, and maybe young people and online as well. And I was talking about whom you run into in your life is very important, because it actually changed your life. This is the person I met, Van Dam, Professor Van Dam. And his first name is Andy. Remember Andy, it's very important, this first name. There's a reason. So I actually very fortunate end up being accepted at Brown University. It's one of the Ivy League university, not a big one, but a good undergraduate one. But they happen to have a really fantastic computer science program. And in fact, when you look at this is 1984. We already have a huge computer lab. We have this token ring, which is the precursor of Ethernet, and we're working on all these workstations in graphics and so on and so forth. And my boss was actually one of the original inventors of computer graphics, so Professor Van Dam. And his name is Andy, and he formed a team that ultimately actually lead to forming something called Random Man, and Steve Jobs bought it, and together with John Lasseter, they formed something called Pixar. Yes. So I was actually hanging out with the group when I was studying in this room, with the people who ultimately will found Pixar. And Andy was actually supposedly named after the professor who did it. So with that in mind, I already pre-admitted to medical school, and Brown has a very interesting curriculum. Maybe UofT should think about it. It's actually pre-admitting medical students or students from high school to become medical students. So now I have 2 years of undergraduate, which I have to do, or 3 years, roughly. Then I have to figure out what I want to do. So I've done most of my pre-med already in United States. And then I have this privilege. Now what do I do for 2 or 3 years? So I thought, wow, at the time, it was really expensive to actually learn computer science. Having a computer is really expensive. It's like $7,000 a personal computer, or something like that. So I decided to learn computer science. I focused on instructional technology, or what back then was actually called CAI, or computer-aided instruction. Some of you may remember all those terms, predating everything. So then I started also in computer graphics. So computer, like putting it all together, learning about user interface as a medical student and instructional techniques using computers back in the 80s, or late 80s and early 90s. This is one of the first projects I did, which is actually making a virtual cath lab in a three-dimensional world for instruction purposes. And fast forward another 20 years later, there's another project using the same idea, and now is using 3D. And it's a virtual glasses, virtual reality, and we actually wrote a paper and presented in Greece, but this is kind of interesting. When you do this, it's like going to virtual IKEA. You go to virtual IKEA, and then you pick this, and you put it there, and then so on and so forth. Once you finish the exercise, and then we have students from OUIT, which is Ontario University Institute of Technology, and we are working together, and we made this and for instructional purposes. The other thing that I did was I always come up with ideas that really frustrates me. And one of the things that happened is when I was in Montreal, I was training as a resident at McGill, and one of my base hospitals is Montreal General, which is up on top of the mountain in Mount Royal, very nice. But back then, all the discharge summaries, so patients leave the hospital, we have to write our check-in scratch on a piece of paper, and then we write our prescription on a piece of paper, and then and then the chart disappeared. And then the patient would show up 2 days later. So why were you here 2 days ago? And why are you here again? And I said, I don't know. So what medication do you take? I don't know. So on and so forth. So I took the initiative with the technology or knowledge that I had. I created a little standalone database on a little Mac. You remember those Mac, which is like Doonesbury Mac? So I had one of those. I had a program called Pharmaca Pro. I just created a program, and it was a standalone, but I was actually doing all these now electronically. This is circa 1987 to 1990. And then it went on for a little while, so actually in all the other teaching hospitals, such as Royal Vic and the Jewish, for example, for those of you who know about the McGill scene. And finally, when I came here, I was able to convince my colleagues to allow me to do this at St. Mary's Hospital. Initially, there was a lot of challenge. They say, well, we don't actually need it. Why do we have to change? And we have now an electronic medical record system. It's going to be much better, and we don't need your thing. But I managed to convince the dean, and we got a quality improvement fund, and we actually did this. And fast forward, I did it in cardiology and internal medicine, and then all these other departments would say, how come they have it, we don't have it? So before you know it, within a year, then this project expanded to the whole hospital. And to this date, 15 years later, that thing that they promised never happened. Now they're going to change it to something else called Epic, which like all the hospitals use, but they still haven't changed mind. They're still using this 15 years later. So I was also doing open source, so by the time I did it, the iPad actually showed up at some point. The iPad can run this like right away without any modification. So it just shows that, I probably, in my whole career, why I highlight this, I probably do more good than being a doctor. The fact that the lack of communication from leaving the hospital to the family doctor or to the like pharmacies or whatever, this has actually done most of the work than me actually seeing patients one by one. Okay, another project that we did was actually called ECG Made Simple. So this is actually for teaching. For some of you in medical school in UofT, you probably have seen it because pretty much every single medical student who go for UofT actually seen it, right? You have seen it. So this actually, we did it at McGill, at St. Michael's Hospital with our colleague. It's still running, and by and large, it's one of the more useful thing for illustration purposes. And then just fast forward, another project that we did. Anyone recognize this particular device? You have to be a certain vintage to recognize this device on the... Yeah, this is called the Palm. So for those of you who are too young to know what this is actually one of the first PDA, otherwise known as Personal Digital Assistant. And this is actually formed by a team of 3 people who flunked out or left Apple, who did the Newton project just before that. So Apple sort of was trying to do this, but then Steve Jobs wasn't really all behind it, or the team wasn't behind it. So these 3 people left, and actually create Palm becomes a huge industry. But then, to fast forward the story, Steve Jobs came back to Apple and then basically created iPhone, right? And then the rest is history. Then iPhone just took over this, and that went away, and BlackBerry kind of went away. So, but the first project I ever did on a PDA, and this is one of the first projects in the world for cardiology calculators, is actually this. So for medical students in the group, or doctors in the group, memorizing formulas is actually quite hard. You only memorize it just for the exam, and you walk out of the exam, it's like, boop. And then to redo all the calculations is actually quite hard. Nowadays, you get all the online calculators. But again, this project was almost 20 years ago, and allows us to actually carry all the formulas. And this is actually all from my study notes. So whenever I study, I write down a piece of card, and it became electronic, like, you know, the little online quizzes. So then I just use all my quizzes, programmed it, and that was one of the first medical calculator on Earth. Then I modified it to be an online version of it, which is actually a calculator for echocardiography, for ultrasound. So when we measure the heart, there's certain things that, you know, we measure, we show how we measure, we do the calculation, and so on and so forth. Just to highlight, these pictures were done by my wife. Back then was my girlfriend. And the way to do dating is very interesting. So what you do is, like, you offer dinner for one picture. So it's very good because I win twice. So not only I get the picture, but I also get a date. So combining that and you know, basically these pictures were done almost like 20 years ago, before my kids were born. And now my kids are like 17 or 18. And these pictures are still being used day to day. So this particular set of calculators has been used around the world. And when I give a talk to Brazil, and they say, "Oh, you are the guy," or something like that. So it's kind of fun, and it's about a few million hits already at this point over the years. Wow. Because people like put it up in the lab when they read echo, then like they go over here to calculate. I mean, we're still using it in our lab at this point. So we also did work for the Americans in terms of putting the guidelines together on the. This is an iPhone project, and also we had it on Android. And we also did this similar work for guidelines and calculators for the Europeans as well. We were one of the first team in Canada or around the world who did this kind of work. And this is actually just a picture of us showing off our app, because it was just launched by the European group of cardiovascular imaging, and it was in Seville, Spain in 2015. So one of the more fun things when you walk in, the whole conference room has your thing on it. It's kind of cool. One of the other very important projects that I've done in my career is actually this thing. And this thing has about 1 million hit minimum every single year. The reason why is, you know, one of the thing about us is, as doctors, we can't remember everything. And we have to live with something called guidelines. Just like, you know, the lawyers in the group, like, you know, you have your case studies. There's no way one can actually remember all your case studies, and similar for us, there's no way we can remember every single guideline that we remember. So being a computer scientist, our training is to try to find ways to remember things without actually remembering them, meaning that to be able to access them really, really quickly. So apart from the like PDA thing that I told you about, the website thing, this is the other thing. In diabetes world, the guideline is about 270 pages and keep adding. It's published every 5 years, and it's really hard to remember. In fact, most of the family doctors or physicians like us would just get this thing on our desk, and comes in the mail, and we quickly look, oh, okay. And then we look at some highlights, and then we put it on the shelf, and we'll never see it again, because it's really hard to find things. So I proposed, and this is actually the outcome. This is actually still being used on a day-to-day basis. And we have all the formulas and algorithms all built into these little squares. And you just click it, and it'll you put in the essential parameters of the patients. For example, you know, what's the fasting glucose is like, what's your 3 months A1C is like. Then it comes up with a recommendation about how to treat, and so on and so forth. So save a lot of work. Diabetes educator used to carry big binders all around the country, and then they have all these photocopies of like meal plans and insulin, and also how often you can check your glucose is now all built into this. So basically anywhere in the country, in the rural area, or you know, in the metropolitan area, people like diabetes educators or nurses or doctors just carry a portable computer with a printer. They can just print everything. So they don't have to carry this huge binder anymore. And last but not least, I want to highlight a little corner thing. Being a Chinese person, And it's very important for our population to understand and what is actually going on, because despite our best effort, many of our elderly patients or recent immigrants, their English is not so great. And because often they come with their children and so on and so forth. So I was able to sneak in the Chinese thing for the patient resource. And in fact, actually end up earning a national award because I was able to tie together all the Toronto volunteers and Vancouver volunteers. We added like whatever we had, and we redid it, and we published it, and now it's still being used. So whenever my patients show up with newly diagnosed diabetes or needing meal plans or advice, I just direct them there. And language specific. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area for patient education. Just to show you a little bit about my other life, so we do artificial intelligence type of work. This is one of the projects I was one of the winners of an international competition with the American Society Echo. And what we do is way back when, we try to figure out whether the computer or machine can actually read ultrasound. So this is one of the first demonstration that we teach the machine different views, and also the right and the wrong ones. And it can actually give you advice how to read it, which view you're reading, and also whether it's the right position and guide you in the right direction. It's called Echo GPS. Just to give you a little bit about other things that I do, I was very much involved in the initially the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and especially the Chinese chapter. This is actually where I met Dr. Poi, and also Justin as well was helping us tremendously about these projects. So we do a lot of things. We create educational symposium for the community, both in Cantonese and Mandarin. We do interviews, we do television, radio interviews, and trying to spread the knowledge to these patients. We also do fundraising for heart and stroke at some point, and we're doing like annual symposium. This is a good example of it just before COVID in person that we do like about 1,000 or 2,000 people that comes and share with us. So these are ways that, being a doctor or physician, this is one of like the worst businessman that you can ever imagine. Okay, have you ever thought of any business would try to turn away people and reduce their own business? That's what a physician does, when you think about it, right? So we're like the worst business people ever. So we do a lot of public education and health promotion to try to make people understand so that they can have the best quality of health. So with that, I'll just have your permission. These are the things I talk about a lot when I'm with my students and residents. These are called Chowism. So they all kind of know that because I keep repeating them. So being an Asian or being a Chinese, my parents said, what doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger. And the other thing that I learned when I was in Boston training is my professors from Harvard always say, when people tell you that you have to do it this way, you have to ask why. And then when people tell you that you cannot do this, and then you have to ask why not. And this is actually just this sentence from every single research that I've ever done. So basically everything that they tell me, oh, you can't do this, like, why can't you do that? So then you do research to prove it possible or not possible. Many of the projects I just showed you for the IT stuff, people told me it's like, that's not useful, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. It's like, somebody did it already. But be that as may, now they're still being used all around. One of the best financial advice for the young people in the group, starting out, is do not get married. I said, really? Or you do get married, do not get a divorce, because financially, you automatically lose about 50%. And there's an exclusion, unless the other side is a lot richer, then that'll be fine. This is just a joke, but the part of divorce is true. Okay, don't get it. Okay, so say thank you often and good morning often. It does not actually cost you anything. It is very interesting because this is not something a lot of our young people do. I think that's, especially after COVID, they don't see people. So the social skills really affecting. And in fact, every morning when I walk in the hospital, I start saying good morning from like the beginning, from the entrance all the way up to my department or my office. It's good because everybody likes you, and like when you get things done in medicine, you need other people. You can't just do it by yourself. It's like it takes a village to help people. So then when people think that you're not like you're relatively easy to approach, then you can help your patient even more because it's all teamwork. So the fifth one is actually if you have not failed before, you have not tried hard enough. These are like old adage. I think Asians have it and other cultures have it as well. Whoop, can you go back to help me? Okay, thank you. Okay, number 6. We can only help those who wants to be helped. This is particularly true in our field. We have people who have different preconceived notion. We try to help them as much as we can. Sometimes they turn us away or turn us down our offers. Like sometimes I ask them to, like, you have to stay in the hospital. You need to be treated. You can't be discharged. But then they say, I really need to go. It's like, I said, no, these are the challenges and, you have to know. But our doors is always open to you. Eventually they will come back. But still you have to, like, some young doctors get very upset when people turn you down because they never got turned down before in their life because they're so successful. Okay, only focus on your own lane and don't pay too much attention to the others. This is actually something to do with bowling. So when you go and bowling, you see other people, wow, they're doing so well, okay? And then you say, okay, then whatever you do, then you start throwing your ball into the gutter. So it's just focus on your own and then, do well and then don't pay too much attention to the others. Shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, you'll land on the moon. That's very common. Take the road less traveled. This is certainly my case because the combination of the work that I've done is actually in some ways, a bit unique. When I first show up at UofT, my boss, the chief of medicine, would say, like, what are you actually doing? Why are you spending time writing software? This is about 25 years ago. And nobody understood this, why that is important. And then once I start showing one project after the other, well, we just got 90,000 downloads for this app, and this is like 1 million hits this year. It's like, oh, there's something there. So it takes a while for people, especially in medicine, because the thinking is very traditional. I mean, right now you go to your boss and say, look, I'm going to do this project on ChatGPT, and then they will tell you, why are you wasting your time? Like, go to the lab and do something, like cell-based. Last but not least is stay hungry and stay foolish. I think that's from Steve Jobs. So once again, thank you. I'll keep it nice and short. So thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.